The invitation. The silence is what Mission Control remembered most. Not the words, those came a moment later, but the pause. That 7-second gap in the transmission that felt like 7 hours. Neil Armstrong's breathing, slow and deliberate, crackling across 238,000 miles of void. And then the words that split history in two. Houston, be advised, we are declaring the Sea of Tranquility a sovereign scientific outpost under Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. We will not be activating the ascent stage. Repeat, we are staying. The coffee cup hit the floor in Mission Control at 10:47 a.m. Central Time. The sound of ceramic shattering on linoleum was the only noise in a room designed to manage the impossible. 37 engineers, flight directors, and NASA administrators stood frozen, staring at speakers that had just transmitted the unthinkable. Gene Kranz, the flight director, the man who would later become famous for saying, "Failure is not an option," felt his throat close. Because in that moment, he realized that failure wasn't the problem. Success was. They had succeeded in landing 2 men on the moon, and those men had just decided not to come back. Welcome to Paths Not Taken. I want to tell you a story about a world that almost was. A world where humanity's first steps into the cosmos weren't a visit, but an invasion. Where the moon didn't remain a barren memorial to human achievement, but became the first battlefield of a conflict that would define the next century. This is the story of the Apollo Rebellion, and it begins not with mechanical failure, but with a choice. A terrible, beautiful, insane choice made by 2 men standing in 1/6 gravity, staring at the Earth and realizing for the first time what it meant to leave it behind. The foundation. Let me take you back to the real world first, the world you know. July 20th, 1969. Apollo 11 touches down in the Sea of Tranquility at 4:17 p.m. Eastern Time. Neil Armstrong climbs down the ladder. He says the words we all know. He and Buzz Aldrin spend 2.5 hours on the surface. They plant a flag. They collect 47 pounds of moon rocks. They take photographs. They talk to President Nixon via radio telephone, the most expensive long-distance call in human history. And then, 21 hours and 36 minutes after landing, they fire the ascent engine. They leave. They dock with Michael Collins in the command module. They come home. They're quarantined for 3 weeks in case they brought back alien microbes. They're paraded down Fifth Avenue. They become immortal. The mission is perfect. Flawless. The greatest achievement in human history. Executed without a single significant error. But here's what most people don't know. In the White House, in a folder marked "In Event of Moon Disaster," there was a speech, written by William Safire, Nixon's speechwriter. Nixon never had to read it, but it existed, and it began like this. "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery. But they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice." The speech was written for a specific scenario. If the Lunar Module's ascent engine failed to fire. If Armstrong and Aldrin were stranded. It's not science fiction, it's contingency planning. Because that ascent engine, the single most critical component of the entire mission, had never been tested in lunar gravity. Could never be tested. It either worked or it didn't. And if it didn't, 2 men would die on the moon while the world watched. NASA estimated the odds of ascent engine failure at about 5%, 1 in 20. Those aren't comforting numbers when you're sitting in a tin can on an airless rock. But let me tell you something else about that ascent engine. Something that kept the astronauts awake during training. It had no backup, no redundancy. If it failed, there was no plan B. No rescue mission could arrive in time. The Lunar Module carried 48 hours of oxygen, maybe 60 if they rationed. After that, Armstrong and Aldrin would have a choice: suffocate slowly or open their helmets and die in seconds. The mission planners knew this, the astronauts knew this, and they went anyway. Why? Because they were test pilots. Because the entire space program was built on the backs of men who looked at acceptable risk and said, "I accept." Because in 1969, with the Soviets breathing down our necks, with the Cold War raging, with national pride and global supremacy on the line, the mission was bigger than two lives. But here's the thing about standing on another world. It changes you. Armstrong talked about it later, in our timeline. That moment when he looked up and saw the Earth, not as a photograph, not as a concept, but as a physical object, a blue marble, fragile and small, hanging in an ocean of nothing. He said it made him feel insignificant and infinite at the same time. Made him realize that all the wars, all the borders, all the nations and flags and ideologies, from up there, you couldn't see any of it. You could only see home, and you could see how alone it was. Now, imagine you're Neil Armstrong, July 21st, 1969. You've just walked on the moon. You've looked back at Earth from a vantage point no human in history has ever held, and you're standing next to a vehicle, the Lunar Module ascent stage, that is supposed to carry you home. A vehicle powered by a single engine. An engine with no backup. An engine that, if it fails, condemns you to death. And you start thinking, what if we didn't go back? The fracture. This moment right here is why we make this series. This is the hinge history swings on. Let me put you inside Armstrong's helmet. July 21st, 1969. 1:54 p.m. Eastern Time. He's back inside the Lunar Module after the moonwalk. He's tired. The suit is hot, uncomfortable, smells like sweat and metal. Aldrin is beside him, running through the pre-ascent checklist. They've got 17 hours before they're scheduled to fire the engine. Armstrong is staring at the ascent engine control panel. It's surprisingly simple. A few switches, a single button. Press it, and either you go home or you die here. He's thinking about the engine, about the 5% failure rate, about the fact that no one has ever tested this exact scenario. And he's thinking about something else. The Lunar Module, what they call Eagle, is designed to keep 2 men alive for 48 hours on the surface. But that's conservative. NASA builds in margins. The oxygen recyclers, the water, the lithium hydroxide canisters that scrub CO2 from the air, it's all over-engineered. They could probably stretch it to 72 hours, maybe more. And Apollo 12 is scheduled to launch in November, 4 months away. Conrad and Bean landing in the Ocean of Storms. What if Apollo 12 didn't go to the Ocean of Storms? What if it came here, to the Sea of Tranquility? What if it brought supplies? Armstrong catches himself. It's insane. It's mutiny. It violates every protocol, every mission parameter, every promise he made. He's a Navy pilot. Chain of command is gospel. But he keeps thinking. The USSR has already lost the race to the moon. America won. But what if America didn't just visit the moon? What if America stayed? What if 4 months from now, there were 4 Americans on the moon instead of 0? What if they built something? He looks at Aldrin. Aldrin is staring at the Earth through the tiny window, that blue marble. And Aldrin says something. Something that wasn't in the mission transcript. Something only the two of them heard. He says, "If we go back now, they'll say we visited. If we stay, we change what's possible." Armstrong's hand is on the radio. He's supposed to call Houston, update them on the checklist, confirm they're ready for ascent. His heart is hammering. This is the decision, not the ascent engine. This. He thinks about his wife, Janet. She's in Houston right now, waiting. He thinks about his sons. He thinks about the fact that if he does this, he might never see them again. But he also thinks about something else. The speech, the one Nixon never had to read. The speech that treated Armstrong and Aldrin's potential deaths as noble sacrifice for exploration, for progress, for the species. What if they made that sacrifice willingly, not by accident, but by choice? What if instead of dying, they lived? What if they turned the moon from a graveyard into a foothold? Armstrong presses the radio transmit button. Houston, be advised, we are declaring the Sea of Tranquility a sovereign scientific outpost under Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. We will not be activating the ascent stage. Repeat, we are staying. 7 seconds of silence. Aldrin is staring at him, not with shock, with something else. Recognition, like he's been waiting for Armstrong to say it. The radio crackles. Gene Kranz's voice. Tight. Controlled. Eagle. Say again. Did not copy last transmission. Armstrong's voice is steady now. Committed. Houston, we are declaring our intention to establish a permanent human presence on the lunar surface. We have sufficient life support for 72 hours. Apollo 12 can reach us in 120 days if retooled for resupply. We are invoking Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, which prohibits national appropriation but permits scientific research stations. The Eagle will remain on the surface. We will not be returning to Columbia. Another pause. Longer this time. And then Krantz. Eagle, you are ordered to proceed with ascent procedures immediately. Armstrong looks at Aldrin. Aldrin reaches over and flips 3 switches. The ascent engine safeguards. He flips them to off. Houston, negative. The Eagle has landed, and the Eagle is staying. Up in the command module, 69 miles above the moon's surface, Michael Collins hears the exchange. He's been orbiting alone for 21 hours, waiting for his crewmates to come home. Now they're telling him they're not coming. Collins doesn't say anything for a long time. The flight controllers are screaming at him to order Armstrong and Aldrin to comply. But Collins is staring down at the Sea of Tranquility, at the tiny silver dot that is the Lunar Module, and he's thinking about something Armstrong said during training. He said, "The moon's not the mission. The mission is figuring out if humans can survive off Earth. Everything else is just tourism." Collins presses transmit. His voice is quiet, almost gentle. "Eagle, this is Columbia. I understand. Good luck, guys. I'll see you when the world catches up." And then he fires his engine and begins the 3-day journey home. Alone. The cascade. The world doesn't catch up. The world goes insane. Let me take you to Washington, D.C., July 21st, 1969, 3 p.m. The Oval Office. Nixon is on the phone with James Webb, NASA administrator. Webb is trying to explain what just happened. Nixon keeps interrupting. "What do you mean they're staying? What do you mean it wasn't engine failure? What do you mean they chose this?" Webb is stammering. He doesn't have answers. No one has answers. This scenario wasn't in any contingency plan. Mechanical failure they prepared for. Astronaut mutiny? That was unthinkable. Nixon hangs up. He sits at his desk for 5 minutes, not moving. His chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, is in the room. Haldeman asks what they should do. Nixon looks up, and suddenly his face changes. The panic is gone. He's smiling. "Get me the networks, all of them. I'm addressing the nation tonight." 6 hours later, Nixon is on television. Every channel. The speech is nothing like the disaster speech in the folder. It's triumphant. "My fellow Americans, today 2 of our bravest citizens made a decision that will echo through history. Commander Neil Armstrong and Lunar Module pilot Edwin Aldrin have chosen to remain on the moon, not because of tragedy, but because of vision. They have established the first permanent American research outpost beyond Earth. They have claimed the high ground of the space age, not for conquest, but for science. And we will not abandon them. Apollo 12, scheduled to launch in November, will now carry supplies to our men on the moon. The United States of America has planted more than a flag on the lunar surface. We have planted a future. The reaction is split down the middle. Half of America thinks Armstrong and Aldrin are heroes, pioneers, the greatest explorers since Columbus. The other half thinks they're reckless, suicidal, and have betrayed their families and their mission. But the USSR? The USSR is furious. Let me take you to Moscow, July 22nd, 1969. The Kremlin. Landed Brezhnev is reading intelligence reports. The Americans didn't just go to the moon, they're staying on the moon. They're building a base. And they invoked the Outer Space Treaty, the treaty the Soviets co-signed in 1967, to justify it. Article 2 of that treaty says, outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. The Americans are arguing that a scientific research station doesn't violate this, that it's no different from Antarctic bases. The Soviets are arguing that a permanent military-capable installation absolutely violates it. Brezhnev calls an emergency meeting of the Politburo. He asks a simple question. Can we reach the Sea of Tranquility before Apollo 12 does? The answer is no. The Soviet lunar program is still struggling. They haven't successfully landed a man on the moon yet. But they could land a probe, an unmanned rover, something. Within 2 weeks, the Soviets announced that Lunokhod 1, originally scheduled for 1970, will launch immediately. Its destination? The Sea of Tranquility. Its mission? To observe the American occupation and ensure compliance with international law. The space race just became the space standoff. But the real insanity is happening at NASA. Gene Kranz has been awake for 38 hours. The entire Apollo program has been thrown into chaos. Apollo 12 was supposed to be a second landing mission, a victory lap. Now it's a desperate resupply run. The engineers are running the numbers. To reach the Sea of Tranquility, Conrad and Bean need to launch in a specific window, but that window is tight. They've got 118 days to completely redesign the Lunar Module to carry supplies instead of experiments, to figure out how to keep Armstrong and Aldrin alive for 4 months on rations designed for 2 days. And everyone is asking the same question. What if we fail? What if Apollo 12 doesn't make it? What if the resupply isn't enough? Then Armstrong and Aldrin die on live television in front of the world, and NASA gets blamed for letting them stay. But there's another problem, a bigger one. Michael Collins returned to Earth on July 24, 1969. He splashed down in the Pacific, alone. He was quarantined, debriefed, and then paraded in front of Congress. The House Committee on Science and Astronautics grilled him for 6 hours. They wanted to know why he didn't override Armstrong, why he didn't refuse to leave them, why he followed illegal orders. Collins told them the truth. He said, they weren't illegal, they were just unexpected. And if I'd refused to leave, I'd be dead too. The command module doesn't have enough life support for me to wait 4 months in lunar orbit. I had to come home. They knew that, and they made their choice anyway. Congressman Olin Teague, chair of the committee, asked the question everyone was thinking. What if this sets a precedent? What if every astronaut we send up decides they don't want to come home? Collins looked him in the eye and said, then maybe we should send astronauts who want to build something instead of astronauts who just want to visit. The hearing room went silent because Collins had just articulated the thing no one wanted to say out loud. Maybe Armstrong and Aldrin weren't crazy. Maybe they saw something the rest of us couldn't. Maybe the future of humanity wasn't on Earth. And maybe the moon was just the beginning. Now, let's follow that decision as it echoes outward. Apollo 12 launches on November 14th, 1969. Conrad and Bean land in the Sea of Tranquility on November 19th. They bring supplies, oxygen canisters, food, water, lithium hydroxide, spare parts, and something else, prefabricated habitat modules, lightweight, inflatable structures designed to be assembled on the surface. Armstrong and Aldrin have been living in the Lunar Module for 120 days. They're gaunt, exhausted. Aldrin has lost 30 pounds. Armstrong's hair has gone almost completely gray. But they're alive. And when Conrad climbs down the ladder and sees them standing there, waiting, he starts crying inside his helmet. He says, "You beautiful, crazy bastards, you actually did it." Over the next 6 days, the four of them assemble the first habitat module. It's crude, a pressurized tube, 12 feet long, 6 feet in diameter, but it has something the lunar module doesn't: room to stand up, room to move, room to think. Conrad and Bean were supposed to return after a week. They don't. They radio Houston and say, "We're staying too." NASA loses its mind, but NASA no longer has control because the four men on the moon have something more powerful than authority. They have leverage. The whole world is watching. If NASA abandons them, NASA becomes the villain. If NASA supports them, NASA becomes the enabler of a new era. Nixon makes the call. Apollo 13, scheduled for March 1970, becomes another resupply mission. And Apollo 14, and Apollo 15. By 1971, there are 8 Americans on the moon. By 1973, they've got a cluster of habitat modules pressurized and connected. They call it Fort Armstrong. It's not a research station anymore. It's a settlement. And the Soviets? The Soviets land. He plants a flag 15 kilometers from Fort Armstrong and establishes Gagarin Station. The Cold War didn't end. It expanded. Let me take you to 1975. The moon now has 14 inhabitants, 8 Americans, 6 Soviets. They can see each other's bases from the right vantage points. They monitor each other's radio traffic. They don't communicate. In the United States, the Apollo program is eating the federal budget. The cost of maintaining Fort Armstrong is staggering, but politically it's untouchable. The Moon Americans, that's what they're called now, are national heroes. Every supply mission is broadcast live. Every birthday, every achievement, every crisis is front-page news. The people on the moon have become larger than life, mythological. They're not astronauts anymore. They're colonists, pioneers, and America is obsessed with them. But there's a problem. What are they actually doing up there? The scientific experiments are secondary now. The real mission is survival, keeping the habitats pressurized, recycling water, growing food in tiny hydroponic gardens, maintaining the equipment. It's subsistence living. It's Antarctica, but worse, because Antarctica has rescue planes. The moon has nothing. And the people who volunteered for this, they signed up for glory. They got labor. In 1976, one of the Moon Americans, a geologist named Harrison Schmitt, tries to come home. He says he's done. He wants to see his family. NASA tells him there's no rotation schedule yet. No one's thought that far ahead. He's stuck. Schmitt goes on a radio interview from the moon. He says, "I volunteered to explore another world. Instead, I'm a prisoner of my own ambition." The quote goes viral. Back on Earth, protests erupt. Bring them home rallies, congressional hearings, families of the moon colonists demanding answers. And NASA has no good ones. Because the truth is, they never planned for this. The moon bases were supposed to be temporary, proof of concept. But they've become permanent, not because of vision, but because of inertia, because no politician wants to be the one who abandons the moon. But the real consequence, the one that reshapes everything, happens in 1958. China announces its lunar program, not a research program, a colonization program. They're going to the moon, and they're not asking permission. The United Nations convenes an emergency session. The Outer Space Treaty is falling apart. The moon is no longer neutral territory. And just like that, humanity's first steps into the cosmos, those beautiful, hopeful steps Neil Armstrong took in 1969, become the first steps towards something darker. We didn't explore the moon. We colonized it. And colonization always, always leads to conflict. The wait. Let me tell you what we lost. In our timeline, the real one, the last human being walked on the moon on December 14th, 1972. Eugene Cernan, Apollo 17. He climbed up the ladder of the Lunar Module, paused, and said, "We leave as we came, and God willing as we shall return, with peace and hope for all mankind." It's been 53 years. No one has returned. The moon in our world is a memory, a monument, a place we visited once and left behind, like the summit of Everest or the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Humanity went there, proved it could be done, and moved on. And because we left, the moon remained pure, untouched, a symbol of human achievement without human ambition. The flags we planted are bleached white now, surrendered to the solar wind. The footprints are still there, perfect and unchanging in the airless void. The plaques we left read, "We came in peace for all mankind." They don't read, "We came to claim this." In the other timeline, the one where Armstrong and Aldrin stayed, that peace never existed. By 1985, the moon has a population of 47, 22 Americans, 18 Soviets, 7 Chinese. They live in clusters of habitat modules that look like industrial trailers scattered across the lunar regolith. They're connected by pressurized tunnels and surface rovers. They grow soybeans and lettuce in hydroponic bays. They recycle their urine into drinking water. They watch Earth rise and set every 29 days and wonder why they're still here. The scientific output is minimal. Most of the research being done is just refinements of life support technology. How to make oxygen from lunar regolith, how to extract water from polar ice, how to survive. Because that's all they're doing, surviving. The dream, the big, beautiful dream of human expansion into the cosmos, has turned into a bureaucratic nightmare. There are now 3 competing space agencies running supply missions on shoestring budgets. There are jurisdictional disputes over crater ownership. There are international incidents when rovers cross invisible boundary lines. In 1988, a Soviet cosmonaut dies, suit failure, during a surface excursion. His name was Yuri Petrov. He was 34 years old. The Soviets blame American interference, claim a U.S. rover kicked up dust that damaged the suit seals. The Americans deny it. The UN holds hearings. Nothing gets resolved. Petrov's body is buried on the moon, not because it's romantic, but because it's cheaper than bringing him home. And the people watching from Earth, they're tired. The moon missions aren't inspiring anymore. They're expensive, dangerous, and pointless. By 1990, public support for the lunar colonies has collapsed. The missions continue, but only because no one knows how to stop them without looking weak. The Cold War, in this timeline, doesn't end with the fall of the Berlin Wall. It ends with the Lunar Withdrawal Accords of 1992. The US, USSR, and China agreed to gradually reduce their presence on the moon. By 1995, there are only 12 people left. By 1998, there are 3. The last person on the moon is an American geologist named Sarah Chen. She leaves on June 3, 2000. Her final transmission is short. "Turning off the lights. See you later, moon." Fort Armstrong, Gagarin Station, and Tiangong Base are left behind. Pressurized ghosts. They're still there today. Abandoned. full of equipment and personal items and frozen food packets, museums that no one can visit. And here's the thing that breaks my heart. In our timeline, when kids look up at the moon, they see wonder. They see the place where humans walked and dreamed and reached beyond themselves. They see possibility. In that other timeline, when kids look up at the moon, they see 3 clusters of metal structures reflecting sunlight. They see the place where humans planted flags and drew borders and replayed the same territorial conflicts that have plagued us for millennia. They see the first battlefield of the off-world Cold War. We think of space as infinite, as a place where humanity can start fresh, leave behind the mistakes of history, become something better. But what if space is just a mirror? What if everywhere we go, we take ourselves with us? Our tribalism, our need to claim, our inability to explore without conquering. Armstrong and Aldrin, in that other timeline, thought they were starting something great, a permanent human presence among the stars. What they actually started was a colonial expansion that proved humanity wasn't ready for the cosmos. Not because we lacked the technology, but because we lacked the wisdom. The moon, in that timeline, stopped being a symbol of what we could achieve together. It became a reminder of what we can't escape, ourselves, the reflection. You are not living in the timeline where humans stayed on the moon. You're living in the timeline where we left. And maybe that's the better one. I know that sounds strange. We're conditioned to think of exploration as inherently good, to think that expansion, progress, pushing boundaries, these are virtues. And they are. But only if we're ready for them. In 1969, humanity wasn't ready. We were still in the grip of the Cold War, still measuring achievement by flags and territory and who got there first. We went to the moon not because we wanted to explore the cosmos, but because we wanted to beat the Soviets. The space race was never about space. It was about supremacy. And if Armstrong and Aldrin had stayed, if we'd built Fort Armstrong and Gagarin Station and all the rest, we wouldn't have been exploring. We would have been claiming. The decision to leave the moon, to come home, to let it remain untouched, that wasn't defeat. That was restraint. That was wisdom. That was humanity saying, we're not ready yet. Let's prove ourselves here first. And maybe one day we'll go back. Maybe one day we'll have learned enough, grown enough, changed enough that we can build settlements on other worlds without turning them into battlegrounds. Maybe. But that day wasn't 1969. The astronauts who walked on the moon in our timeline, they're all old now, or gone. Armstrong died in 2012. Aldrin is still with us. He's 95 years old. And he still looks up at the moon and sees the place where he walked for 2.5 hours, collected rocks, and came home. He doesn't regret leaving because he understood something that we often forget. The point of exploration isn't to stay, it's to return. To bring back knowledge, perspective, transformation, to see the world from the outside and then come back and make it better. Armstrong's first words from the lunar surface were about a giant leap for mankind. Not for America, not for democracy, for mankind. And the greatest giant leap he made wasn't the one down the ladder, it was the one back into the command module, the decision to leave. To let the moon remain a shared dream instead of a contested territory. You're living in the world created by that decision. The light you're using to listen to this, the phone or computer in your hand, the fact that you can look up at the moon tonight and see it as it was, pristine, untouched, waiting, that's because we left. We didn't abandon the moon, we honored it. And the men who walked bare and came home, they didn't fail to establish the other path, the path where Armstrong and Aldrin stayed, where we built Fort Armstrong and divided the moon into sectors and turned the cosmos into another battlefield, that path was never taken. And thank God for that, because the moon still waits. Pure, silent, patient, waiting for the day